All right, welcome everybody. You've probably heard by now we are out of school until at least April 20th. Some people foresee it going a little bit longer. Keeping our fingers crossed that we still get to come back before the year's over. But with something like this, you never know. It's so new. So just hang in there and do the best you can. We are looking at some alternative ways to do class, so we might be able to do some live stuff versus just recordings and worksheets and reading. But again, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Today we are going to continue on with the arthropods, so phylum Arthropoda. Specifically today we're going to be looking at the hexapods, which are your insects. So if you don't like bugs, you're a little squeamish, bear with me, because today and at least Friday, maybe even after spring break, we'll still be doing the hexapods. So you're just going to have to get used to it. All right, this is going to include all your insects, so your things that may look weird, like the scorpion fly up there, or the caterpillar to your right. Both those are real insects. None of that's photoshopped, which is wild, especially the scorpion fly. But it also includes basic things like the ant, the honeybee that you see there. All right, before we can do that, we're going to talk a little bit about insect outbreaks. So humans, suffer a lot of economic losses to insects. One specific example of this are locust outbreaks in Africa. So you've probably heard of locusts when you think about the Bible, but they are very real and they are still something that happens quite frequently. They have two phases. So they have a quiet phase and they have a plague phase. In the quiet phase, they cover over 9.9 million square miles in 30 different African countries. So even in their quiet phase, they're everywhere. And then they have their plague phase, which is the worst phase. They're going to cover about 18 million square miles in 60 different countries during that plague phase. The last plague phase that they had was between 86 and 89. So a little bit in the past, but again, think about how massive the plague phase is compared to the quiet phase. The quiet phase still happens more frequently. To give you an idea about these swarms, you have 40 to 80 million insects per kilometer, which is about 0.6 miles. So you have tons and tons of bugs. The largest one actually was in Kenya at one point. It was 200 billion insects, which is an absolutely absurd amount of insects and quite terrifying. Honestly, the pictures are pretty scary as well. Just to give you a kind of a general idea about how much food that many insects can eat, if you take a swarm of insects, so this locusts specifically, that cover 1 square kilometer, so 0.6 square miles, they can eat as much food in one day as 35,000 humans. So they can come into these farmlands and completely wipe things out and cause a ton of damage. A lot of these African countries, they are already very poverty-stricken areas, and you can imagine entire crop fields and things being wiped out by these swarms of locusts. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about, the first organism. We're going to talk about a few more because I think that we're going to start with the negative aspects of insects and we're going to end with the positive. So let's deal with the good news first, the bad news first. We're starting bad news. So we're going to look at the negative aspects of insects in general and work our way towards the positive, because there are some very positive effects of insects. The next thing we're going to look at are termites. So U.S. property owners shell out about $20 billion a year to keep termites from eating them out of house and home. And that is literally eating them out of house and home. They do horrible damage to the structure of the house. Houses are made of wood, right? So if you get a termite infestation, they can literally eat your house to where it's no longer stable and even could collapse if it got bad enough. That's how houses end up getting condemned. Anytime you buy a house, you have to have an inspection done. One of the things they look for in inspections are termites, because they're that nasty. A little bit about termites in general. They have wings early on, but when they find a good place to build a nest, they're going to shed their wings. So they're an organism that has two phases. Dimorphism. They have a phase where they have wings. They have one where they don't have wings. How do they take over so quickly? Well, some termite species, the queens can lay 15 to 25 eggs per minute. That is per minute. So that equates to about 40,000 per day. Now, obviously, not all of them are going to survive. But even if half of them survive, that's 20,000 new termites in a single day, and it just gives you an idea how they can take over an area so quickly. The total weight of all the termites in the world is actually more than the total weight of all humans. So again, if you look at something that small, the fact that if you add all of them together, they weigh more than all of the humans combined, it just shows you how many termites there really are. What makes them super deadly to homes is that they eat nonstop. So they eat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They never stop eating. So again, it can really start to do a lot of damage in a short amount of time to structures that are made out of wood. All right, so that's termites. We're going to move on now to something called the emerald ash borer. They are an insect from Asia. They're called an invasive species, which means they were introduced to a new area that they're not native to. And this is really not good for this particular bug. In the top right corner, what you're seeing is the adult emerald ash borer. It's got a really great color. It's a cool looking bug. And that adult insect's really not going to cause you that many problems. They eat mainly dead leaves and decaying tree matter at the bottom of the tree or the base of the tree. And they're not going to cause you any issues. However, the larvae underneath, so that's like a baby emerald ash borer there, they actually can only eat living matter. So what the adult will do is lay its egg on the bark, and that will burrow its way into the tree. It will eat all the living matter in the tree bark and in the couple layers of tree. And you can see that in the picture to the left where there's all those lines. That's where it's bored its way through the tree. And this is actually going to kill the tree. So these things kill up to 99% of the ash trees that it comes in contact with. It's it's wiped out ash trees across North America. It originated in Detroit. The idea is that it came from Asia in some lumber shipments and made its way actually in Detroit, Michigan. For an idea about how much they've spread, if you look at this graph here, so the green is the approximate range of ash trees, and then all of your red dots are just the initial county that detected the emerald ash borer. So you can see it's spreading like wildfire. Who knows if they're going to be able to curve this or not. The hope is that they can, but you never know. They've already got a case as far west as Colorado. So hopefully, just like you're quarantining yourself for the coronavirus, they've actually set up quarantines around these areas where they've identified this bug as being present. Moving on, a winning combination. What do we mean by that? Well, insects outnumber all other species of animals in the world combined. So if you look at that picture to the right, your chordates are mammals, birds, reptiles, things that have a spinal cord. You have your protozoans, which we talked about way long ago in the year. You have your arthropods, which we're talking about now, but in regards to this picture, they're talking about arthropods that are not hexapods or insects. And then your other invertebrates, so the other things we've talked about, like jellyfish and coral reefs and worms and whatnot. That's the percentage, a pie graph of all living things on Earth. You can see the huge chunk that insects take up. They take up just the absolute vast majority of all life on Earth. And they do this because they're extremely adaptable. They can survive in pretty much all environments, climates, whatever. They've found a way to survive. Scientists have estimated that there are 200 million insects per every single human alive today. So they vastly outnumber us. Thank God they don't ever gang up and kind of get like a hive mind, like arachnophobia, because that would be the end of us. They're so numerous. And on top of that, they can cause some pretty significant economic loss, mostly as pests for food, farmland and things like that. But they can also cause really bad outbreaks and insect transmitted disease, one of which obviously malaria. But we're also going to talk about Chagas disease a little later on. Talking about those insect transmitted diseases, the two that I want to talk about specifically are malaria, obviously, because of the vast number of deaths that are caused by malaria every year. In 2018, we don't have 2019 numbers just yet, but for 2018, there was an estimated 405,000 deaths just from malaria alone. the largest portion of that coming in Africa, but still very, very deadly. We talked about this when we talked about protozoans, so it's a plasmodium that causes this, but its life cycle only occurs in the mosquito. So you can see the picture to the left, that's actually a species of mosquito that would transmit malaria. To the right, that terrifying thing is a bed bug, which you've all heard of. But the thing about bed bugs is that they can carry something called Chagas disease. So an estimated 8 million people are infected worldwide with Chagas disease. This occurs mainly in Latin America, and it actually kills around 10,000 to 12,000 people per year. So it's a very deadly disease that is a problem in a lot of poverty-stricken countries who don't have the means to eradicate bed bugs, especially when bed bugs can be transferred from person to person. If they're on your clothes, if you share a laundromat, it could be transferred that way as well. All right, so let's talk about some of the characteristics of the subphylum Hexapoda. The first thing we're going to talk about is the name. So hexapod. Hexa is the prefix for 6. Poda means feet or legs, so it actually is called 6 legs. It's an organism, or a subphylum composed of organisms that have 6 legs. They have 3 body segments. We call those tagmata. Remember that a body segment is called a tagmata. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So right off the bat, you should see a distinction between your subphylum Chelicerata and your subphylum Hexapoda, because hexapods have an extra segment. In the Chelicera, you see a cephalothorax, so it's a head and thorax that are fused. Here, they are not fused; they are separate tagmata. All right. However, like the Chelicera, the appendages are attached to the head and thorax. The abdominal or the abdomen doesn't have appendages. If they do, they're really reduced. But most of your appendages are attached to the head and thorax. And then within Hexapoda, there are 2 classes that we're going to talk about. Actually, there's one class we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about the first one. That's going to be things like springtails and bristletales and things that are very, very tiny. And if you want to check them out, feel free. We're not going to take the time to look at them. We're going to focus entirely on the Insecta class, and then we'll break that up into orders because, again, it's such a massive class. Okay? So class Insecta, that's the one that, again, I want to focus on. They have 2 general groups, and these groups are based on whether the creature is winged or wingless. So if it is a winged insect, it is a pterygote, and if it is a wingless insect, it is a apterygote. So that P is silent, but that's going to be your difference. And so if you think about actual organisms, you have an ant. Now some ants do have wings. This particular one that I picked is a wingless one. So that's going to be a pterygote. And then if you look at that's going to be a pterygote. And then of course the butterfly, which has to have wings, obviously is a pterygote. So don't get confused on that. Wingless, it has an A. If it's winged, it does not. Now, class Insecta is the most diverse and abundant of all arthropods. It makes up the vast majority of the organisms in the phylum Arthropoda. There's an estimate out there of how many species there are. It's 1.1 million. That's the number of known. I just screwed that all up, but that's okay. I'm gonna start over. The number of known species was 1.1 million. However, some scientists have estimated that there might be as many as 30 million different species worldwide. So they're very, very, very abundant. They vastly outnumber anything else that's on this planet. All right, they're common in freshwater, brackish water, or salt marshes. They can also be found, obviously, in soils, forest canopies. They can be found in deserts, wastelands, mountaintops. They can be parasites in other organisms. So they've got all these different habitats. Now, there are people who will go into all these different habitats and study insects. This is called entomology, or the study of insects. And it's a pretty important field because if you imagine there's not a whole huge number of people out there who want to dedicate their lives to studying insects. They're gross, they creep people out. They don't want to be around them that much, but we have these people who are willing to do it. And it's really important. It takes a lot of time and resources to do it, but it has to be done, because if you think back to these outbreaks and these economic and disease transmitted, or the insect transmitted diseases, it's important that we understand insects and how they affect our environment, how they benefit, how they have negative effects. So if you're somebody who is interested in insects, think about entomology. It wasn't for me, but it might be for you. Insects, like we just said, are very abundant. They're widespread. We find them everywhere. If you think about, freshwater insects, you've got the dragonfly in the bottom left corner there. If you think about soil insects, you've got ants that create these elaborate nests and hives that can span underground and be broken up into like a higher order of ants, so your workers and your queen and whatnot. You've got things that live in forest canopies. You've even got a bug in the top right corner there. It's a beetle that lives in the desert, and it can actually draw water from the atmosphere, and that's how it gets most of its water, which is really cool. And then we talked about parasites. What you're seeing there is a type of wasp that actually lays its eggs inside of a caterpillar. So those larvae are parasitic, and the way that they'll hatch inside the caterpillar, and they'll eat the caterpillar from the inside out, and then explode out of the caterpillar as tiny little wasps that can grow into adults. So you still have parasitic insects, which is pretty terrifying, honestly. Another thing that makes them so widespread is their ability to protect their eggs, even in horrible conditions, and then their eggs can actually be transmitted by other animals. They're also very adaptable. They've shown an amazing evolutionary adaptability, and you see this because they're so well distributed and widespread. They wouldn't be if they weren't very adaptable. Most of the structural modifications you see are in their wings, their legs, their antenna, their mouth parts. Such wide diversity allows for different food source uses, different shelters, so they can use a whole bunch of different things that other organisms can't. Some are parasitic, some suck the sap off plants, some chew up leaves and plant material, some eat other insects. The list goes on and on. Some even live on the blood of various animals. Obviously, mosquitoes come right to mind when you think of that. But even within these groups, you have great specialization, so that a particular kind of insect will eat the leaves of only one kind of plant. They don't branch past that one kind of plant. So even within these groups of organisms, there's specialization. And what that does is it lessens competition between other species. So if you're an insect that eats only one plant and nothing else eats that plant, there's nothing to compete with you. You have basically unlimited food, which is really good for you. And so that kind of piggybacks on this specificity of how they eat and whatnot. Another thing is they're well adapted to dry and desert regions. They have a hard exoskeleton, so when you step on a bug and it crunches, you're crunching through that hard exoskeleton. But that hard exoskeleton is really good at preserving water. So if it gets all of its water needs from food or from the atmosphere or whatever, it can keep that water in through the exoskeleton. So you've got 4 organisms here, all of which are going to show a pretty cool adaptation that I thought I would just throw out there. In the top left corner, that is a rhinoceros beetle, or it's often called a Hercules beetle. It's the largest beetle in the world, and it is also the strongest creature on Earth for its size. Now, obviously, it can't lift more than you, but for its size, it can carry 850 times its weight, which is absurd. If you want a kind of comparison, that's like a person carrying 7 elephants. So you can imagine that's just almost a superpower at that point. The thing in the top right corner is a leaf insect. It's just really good at camouflage, so that's another really good adaptation that insects have come up with, the ability to blend into their environment. There's tons of examples of these. You've probably seen them before. Down in the left-hand corner there, the beetle with the yellow spots, That's a blister beetle, and they're called that because they actually produce a blistering agent. So it'll create this toxin that it releases from the beetle's leg joints when it gets disturbed or it feels threatened. They call this reflex bleeding. So if something around it that might eat it comes along, it can release this toxin, and it can actually literally cause blisters or burning to whatever's trying to get to it. A lot of times, insects that tend to spray acids or release some kind of terrible smell will be brightly colored or have a contrasting pattern that seems to attract attention. All right, so why would this be good in an environment where you're trying not to get eaten? Well, it says, hey, I'm here. Look at my colors, see if you want to eat me, right? You can imagine if you were walking and you just kind of find an unwrapped candy bar just sitting in the middle of the sidewalk. Odds are you wouldn't touch it, right? You wouldn't eat it because why is it sitting there? Why hasn't anyone else eaten it? And it's the same way for these bugs, because predators quickly learn to associate these colors and patterns with an unpleasant outcome, right? It only takes one faceful of acid to learn not to bother that thing that's bright red or bright yellow or whatever the colors may be. Now, that does mean that at some point the first thing that got eaten died, or the first thing that ate one of these brightly colored things died, but, that's a sacrifice for the rest of the species. Now they know not to eat it. But that's just some of the adaptations you see in hexapods. There's obviously many more. But that's it for today. We're going to talk a little bit more about insects and kind of the specific order of them on Friday. So make sure you get your notes turned in. They're due 8 a.m. Wednesday morning. Please don't forget. And I will talk to you on Friday.